These penguins call Antarctica home, but their home is starting to shrink. The ice cover here usually peaks each September before melting away over summer. But the US agency tasked with tracking it says this year's peak was the lowest it's ever seen. And less white ice to reflect sunlight back into space means temperatures will continue to rise.
The seasonal cycle is usually really reliable. You can look at every other year overlain and you can see 2023 just standing off the charts.
Emperor penguins like these breed and raise their young on the sea ice. But last year, the ice melted away before thousands of new chicks were ready.
And the chicks, they have these fluffy feathers. They can't swim and they can't dry themselves if they fall in the water. And so the sea ice melted and these penguins drowned, and it was over 9,000 penguins.
Toward the North Pole, young people are heading to court. They're concerned about the impacts of rising temperatures.
It is dangerous. We are losing our planet. And also, the rising of sea levels and storms, the so-called sea surges.
The Global Legal Action Network is suing over 30 European governments. They say governments aren't taking enough action, but scientists say the sun hasn't set on the chance for change.
These climate stories can sometimes feel really overwhelming. We've heard these stories about the penguins, and they're awful. But let's take this awful information and let's make changes, because we can really still make a difference to the future.
And give the penguins some more room to move. Lachlan Patrick, ABC News.
As a scientist, it's really frustrating. So we came here in March and we expected to have a long and productive scientific campaign through the winter, and the sea ice just didn't show up for several months. And now it has shown up. It's quite thin, it's quite fragile, so even a strong set of winds can blow it away, which is annoying for us scientifically, but also dangerous for us to work on. But as an ordinary human being, it's very striking to know that there is this huge expanse of bright white sea ice that would normally be there and that is just absent this year, and it's been replaced by ocean.
Now, the issue is that it's not just this year. It's been sort of systematically reducing over the last couple of years. I mean, we all know climate change is a factor, but why do you think that the drop-off in sea ice has been so dramatic?
We still haven't really resolved that as a scientific community, but signs are starting to drift towards warmer waters. So waters that are maybe even saltier, but certainly you have to lose more heat from that water before you can form ice. But there are also other potential culprits like wind blowing sea ice into places it isn't normally there, but also just warmer than average air temperatures.
Give us an idea of what sort of work you would have been able to do had there been a very strong sea ice coverage.
So we're here to figure out the third dimension, how thick the sea ice is. The thickness of sea ice is really, really important for predicting how it's going to change, but also understanding why it's behaving like it is right now. So that was our major goal, and we have had some success, but that success has come very, very late in the season.
The sea ice coverage is constantly, of course, moving and transforming. This year it was September 10 versus 13. Is that a big difference?
No, I wouldn't read much into a few days either side. The real big story for me is the size, the amount of area that's covered, rather than the exact timing of the maximum.
What are the consequences, obviously, from the work you do, but for the globe, the fact that this has not formed as significantly this year yet again?
So we've just moved into the summer season in Antarctica, where the days are more than 12 hours long, and they're only going to get longer now. And that missing part of the sea ice is reflecting less and less sunlight. So it's warming the ocean, but it's also warming the environment around here, where there are glaciers, ice shelves, ice sheets. And when the ice sheets melt, they raise sea level rise, and that affects the whole globe. But there are other factors as well that sea ice is important for, like marine ecosystems, so birds, whales, krill, penguins, things like that are really sensitive to sea ice changes. But finally, it could be disrupting the oceanography in a way that makes it much harder for the ocean to take carbon dioxide out of the air. So we're potentially seeing damage done to a major tool in our toolbox to fight climate change.
Yeah. So when that happens, what can the consequences of not being able to process this carbon dioxide?
We have a good understanding that if we go to net zero, the world will stop warming. But we also hope that the ocean will then really take a leading role in removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere on long timescales, but that just might not happen as efficiently as possible. this is somewhat speculative, but it's an important risk that we need to think about.
Yeah. Can these things go in phases? I mean, is it possible that next winter you might get a really very solid sea ice coverage?
It is possible, and we need to remain open to that. But what we're seeing is a series of, it's a bit like when you pull a slot machine and you've seen 1 lemon, 2 lemon lines up, and now we need to start thinking about whether we're going to get a whole row of lemons.
And what happens when we get a whole row of lemons?
I would say potential environmental devastation. So.
Yeah, it's not
no,
the jackpot.
It's certainly not. It's a series of really damaging impacts to ecosystems and the ice that sits on the land in Antarctica.
Yeah. You know, the UN recently met in New York, of course. How disappointed were you to hear that so many countries are so far behind the sort of commitments they've made to reducing emissions?
Yeah, it is really, really difficult. And they have a degree of my sympathy that times are hard with the war in Ukraine and COVID and inflation, but it is the biggest challenge of our time, and we need to deal with it to save money in the medium and the long term. So certainly I would just plead with politicians to look beyond their electoral timelines and think about the timeline of society.
Yeah. Do you think it's going to be a key conversation coming up at COP28 in November?
I hope it will, but certainly a lot of scientists that I speak to have their doubts. I'll be there once again pleading with policymakers to take action, but it's getting more and more difficult to convince them.
Yeah. I'm interested, Robbie, you know, if finally, you know, there are countries moving quite aggressively to try and change the energy sources that might be the game changers down the track. But I wonder if that, when and if that does happen, whether we are able to reverse some of these problems.
Yeah, reversibility is a really fraught scientific topic, and certainly reversibility of Antarctic sea ice is very poorly understood. Reversibility of the Arctic is we can be reasonably confident that if we start to reduce global temperatures, that the Arctic sea ice will recover, at least in summer. But the damage that we're potentially doing in Antarctica to these glaciers that took thousands of years to form, and these ocean currents that have significant inertia, they have momentum, and it's hard to change them. We can't just click our fingers and switch those back to how they were.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us, and I hope you still have plenty of work to keep you busy, even if it's not what you were hoping for.
Yeah, we certainly do. Thank you.